Like, so normally when you're using a checkbox, if you're using a screen reader or if you're just using your keyboard, you're supposed to be able to use the spacebar to toggle. But when you use the spacebar to toggle, it just throws you to a random place in the form. So you're just like kind of lost in no person's land, like, okay, well, what do I do next?
You're listening to Discussing Stupid, a podcast sponsored by HiMonkey. Join your host, Virgil, Carol, and others as our podcast helps you transform bad digital experiences into teachable moments you can use.
Well, we made it, and if you're listening to this, we're on the last episode, episode 18 of season 2. And I want to thank everybody for joining us during this journey of kind of reinventing and bringing back Discussing Stupid after many years. This first year has definitely been a lot of new learning experiences, hopefully a lot of great content for people. But we're looking forward to kicking off season 3 in September, and already have a lot of great ideas and a lot of great new topics to go over. But speaking of episode 18, today's inspiration really comes from accessibility and forms. Probably one of the most painful things you can do in the world of accessibility and inclusive design is have accessible forms. And ironically, not only is it difficult to do on your own, but most people rely on third-party tools, whether it's something built into your content management system, or maybe it's a forms tool itself. And it's amazing how many of these tool organizations that have had tools out there for forms for a really long time do a crappy job with this and cause a lot of problems, and you end up having to do a lot of modifications just to make it work yourself. So today we're going to talk about a lot of the common problems that people run into with forms and accessibility, and some of the ways that you can look to tackle it from that side. And we're going to be bringing in another member of our team, Ali Gillberg, who has been with me for a long time, and she is our residential form expert and going to bring some great thoughts and opinions on that. So again, enjoy the episode, but thank you for joining us for season 2, and we'll see you next time on season 3 starting in September.
I mean, the main point of today's episode is just how there's a lot more that goes into the accessibility of forms than like probably anyone realizes. But we thought that...
And we've got a new guest.
Yeah, and we do have a new guest. Ali, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Ali Gillberg. I've been working for HiMonkey for over a decade now, and I do the majority of the forms work for the company.
Sweet, yeah. So speaking of forms, I feel like most people see a form, they think, oh yeah, this looks clean, must be fine, right? But from your perspective, as a developer working so much on forms, what are some of these like hidden issues that people might not think of that make forms pretty unusable for a lot of users?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one, just right off the bat, is like trying to figure out what it is that they need to actually fill out, right? I think the first thing that I think about when I see a form is like, how many of these fields do I do I really need to fill out before I can
right.
submit this? So like the beginning upfront work is like, really, what do you actually need from people so that they actually fill it out?
It's funny that you say that, because, when we talk about accessibility and kind of user experience, it's like how many times you just can't figure out what are actually the required fields, or you had an org that made every field required, even though they're really not, and just have kind of made a mess of that. But that's equally important for people that are using screen readers and that, to understand the fields that they actually need to pay attention to.
Yep. So like the labeling and the naming is really huge. So that's more of a content thing, but in the end, that's going to be the biggest one, right? Like if it says name and they really want first name, or they want your full name, or they want your like legal name, like you have to be specific with how you're labeling things. Otherwise you'll probably get the whole range. People will just be like, oh, Ali filled this form out, and you're like, okay, cool, I have 40 Alis that filled this out, like what do I do next? is as
Yeah.
helpful anymore.
Well, the good news is since most organizations use, whether it's a content management system
Hmm.
or, maybe something like Power Apps or Google Forms or something like that, they're using a system that, does kind of all that back end accessibility work for you, and there's no problems, right? And
Oh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yep.
I think that's one of the big problems is most of these form packages are kind of crap in that and don't do a very good job of actually meeting the needs of kind of a diverse audience. And I think that is one of the huge things that we see on a regular basis in that, especially and I thought of that when you thought about form labeling and how every form field has to have a form label, and not every there's a lot of modernistic styled type. I mean, even Cole, you and I, when we were dealing with the podcast, we had the subscribe box, and it didn't the form label was ugly, and and their default was the form label wasn't there, but the form label has to be there. So what do you do with it in that? And obviously
Right.
there's strategies behind the scenes if we were just building the form ourselves, like using aria label and that kind of stuff, or aria 4 I guess in that one. But none of those tools make it easy, and that's really a big problem is most modern tool sets for forms are crap.
Well, right, modern kind of ends up being synonymous of I don't get to edit any of this.
Yeah.
Basically, we're stuck in the whatever framework they have. I mean, you mentioned Power Apps. That's a big one. We had that big project for the Office of Accessibility, so it needed to be truly accessible, and we ended up having to touch over 20 settings per field to actually make that be true, whether that's
Which is
visually
just
or
ridiculous.
yeah,
I
or
mean,
validation or
it's not a
whatever.
ridiculous requirement. It's a ridiculous need that you need to set 20 settings and do some advanced coding behind the scenes to make a form truly accessible.
Hmm.
And that is definitely a unique as far as the audience in that, and the people working at the agency, that actually some people use screen readers that work there and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, you're talking about very robust testing, and knowing for a fact that the form needs to work well, in that. So I think another often overlooked one that is probably to most people is kind of funny, and just thinks automatically happens is tab order.
Hmm.
And that, because on a screen reader, that's how a lot of people are going through it. Well, even from people that aren't using a screen reader, they're tabbing through it. And I can tell you one of the most annoying things there is like when I'm tabbing and all I'm getting is like labels. I'm tabbing through and
Right.
I'm going through
It
the
takes
labels
4 clicks to get to the next
to
actual
get from one
field.
field to the next. Yeah. So there's a lot of things you can do there as well.
Yeah, and
Yeah, on
of
that
course.
office of, oh, sorry. On that office of accessibility, gosh, I cannot speak right now. But on that project, what are some of the issues that you like thought you were going to run into? And did those come up, or were you kind of met with more surprises in that project?
I think, I was expecting to have to do a decent amount of like customizing for that, mostly because not only did we have to, just use Power Apps, which, like I said, we needed to touch a lot of the settings to be able to make just the out of the box fields work the way we were expecting, but we also had the added requirement of being able to save it without validation and save it with validation. So we even had to go away from just the standard, like having things marked as required or not within the form. So all of that had to be custom, which was definitely kind of a huge, a huge piece. I also definitely wasn't expecting the out of the box, even with modern fields, to take so much work to be even just like responsive for like page sizes, or zooming. That was probably one of the bigger things that we ended up having to touch more settings for, because everything comes set. If you make a Power Apps form, it comes and everything is at 1200 width, like just a set width. So you have to go in and put width of the viewport, or like you have to change that to match the width of the whole actual form itself instead of having that set pixel, because that was just like ugly when you go to reset anything and then just like, oh, you can't see any of the text anymore because it went zoop, and it's all past the. It's just like, that seems like a really easy thing to make that HTML work better, but again, we don't get to touch that HTML when we're in the PowerApps form. We just have the settings to work with, so
Well, I mean, even
it's
on
huge.
website, most of those form builders don't allow you really to do a lot with the
True.
HTML. And I think another ironic part when you look at that from an accessibility standpoint, I mean, if you really understand the fundamentals of screen readers and tools like that, is they're basically they're going through the code of the site, versus
Hmm.
the visual side of it. And a lot of these builders not only do that, they add a lot of extraneous code, a lot of extra stuff in there. And so there could be one field, but that field could be 5 divs buried inside one another, inside another 6 spans, and that kind of stuff. And sometimes it's ridiculous, which is why with forms tend to be, I think, for most organizations, their biggest failure in the world of WCAG accessibility, and that
Hmm.
because they tend to just use what's out of the box and it tends to never work right. But on top of that, I think that um, they don't really understand, how important. That's why I go back to like that tab order and how that kind of stuff works, that they can use those type of mechanisms to be able to get to the things they actually need on a form. It's not just about getting to the form fields in the right order. It's about actually being able to see the correct stuff, because so many of these form tools add so much extra crap in there that they don't need to pay attention to. So I think, where I've seen a lot of people be like, well, yeah, tab order is a nice thing to have and that kind of stuff. There's actually a definitive purpose for that. It's just like an HTML being able to follow the header structure and that kind of stuff. There's a definitive purpose. Otherwise, somebody that is using that kind of assistive technology has to sit there and go through a bunch of stuff that they don't care about because your page is not properly structured. It's the same thing with your form.
Yeah, I mean, even when you're going through validation, one of the weird ones with this was the like required asterisks is not something that you can have in, like, you can have it in your accessibility label, but it's like the actual one that pops up when you put it as required. It doesn't show up in any screen readers or anything like that. So we had to go completely away from using that. And then also just like different field types. So, you're like, oh, I want to use a checkbox and a drop down and a long text and a short text. We actually found that the checkbox is not very accessible within PowerApps. That was one of the ones that we actually brought all the way to their accessibility folks,
Oh, at
which
Microsoft,
was
you're saying, yep.
yeah, and they were like, "Oh, that's weird." Like, so normally when you're using a checkbox, if you're using a screen reader or if you're just using your keyboard, you're supposed to be able to use the spacebar to toggle. But when you use the spacebar to toggle, it just throws you to a random place in the form. It does toggle from yes to no or no to yes, but then it also just throws you somewhere else. So you're just like kind of lost in no
Oh, wow.
person's land.
Dang.
Like,
Sounds like
okay,
a
well, what do
caveat.
I do next? So
Another
tab
one that
order is
makes me
totally
think
thrown
about
out.
that is date pickers. Date pickers are big problems for that. And
Yeah,
you have to have an alternate way for them to be able to do dates besides using a picker. And how many forms do you know out there that really the only way to add the date is to pick it, to
it's
use a
true.
picker and that kind of stuff.
That one actually did pretty well with our testing, which
Well, that's
was
good.
a surprise. So they spent a lot of time on that.
Yep.
um,
I've seen a lot in the web space though on that one where a lot
yes.
of them have issues and they just don't work well. Yep.
Wait, what'd you do for the alternative to the asterisks in that situation?
So what we ended up doing was actually just kind of changing the format of our labels. So we had the asterisks included in the label and actually had it say like required on all of them. And then when the validation was essentially pinged on that, we had it so that it sort of changed that text, which the screen readers did pick up that was different. So it was like basically it said required at the end or required at the beginning, so that when you were going through, you could just look for the ones or listen for the ones that had required at the beginning instead. That was sort of where we landed. It's not perfect per se, but it met the requirements that
How did that
a
work
crew
for
on it.
validation? So if they filled out the form, but then it wasn't complete and now they needed to jump back. I know that was another part of those forms. And another thing we don't necessarily think of from forms, especially in long forms, is
Mhm.
what happens. I mean, even people that are using just a web browser, if I'm in a long form and that form, field way up here is the one that actually I didn't fill out correctly, or I didn't meet some kind of validation error. But I know from an accessibility standpoint, we found a lot more challenges around that.
Yeah, so even just not from an accessibility standpoint, with PowerApps out of the box, the set focus, which is the thing that actually scrolls you up to where you want to go, only works on text fields, basically. So it works on buttons as well, but you don't want to have just like a
Good
bunch of
feature, yeah.
buttons everywhere for that. So we ended up having to put in hidden text fields that had a label that said tab to fix this error, because it was just one tab order away from the one we actually wanted it to fix, when it was like drop downs or other options. So the majority of this form is drop downs or text fields. So, but lots of drop downs. So basically, 50% of the form we had to do that workaround with
Yeah.
them. So again, it's not perfect, but it does scroll you up to it and it does give you the label that says tab to fix
Yeah.
the one that's broken. So you could actually get there without having to
Yeah.
visually see it, or just guessing about which ones are wrong.
We always look at things and kind of say where there's a will and there's a way, but the reality is, I mean, and I'm not just going to pick on Microsoft. I'm going to look at almost any form builder I've ever used. They all fall down. I mean, some of this should fall on them, and I know part of that reason was we needed to get a project done, and Microsoft, that was just too big of a change or anything that they could do, at that point. But you would think that, in today's world, they would care about that. So, but sometimes you're going to have to do some advanced things on your own. So, I think the nice thing about this is people think about, they probably know about the labeling. They know kind of about the standards that you get when you use some kind of tool to do testing, but there's so much more to it when you're dealing with like functional activities, especially versus just reading a web page that is into the accessibility side. So I think all that information is great, and anybody that listens is going to have a lot of good ideas from that.
Speaking of good ideas, a good idea would be to like and subscribe and comment and share this podcast.
And that. So yeah, well, that's it. Season 2 is now officially in the bag. We made it here, and we're done. So looking forward to episode 3, season 3 coming out in September, and I guarantee you we're going to have Ali back again in that. But nice way to end the season with a bang.
Yeah, thanks for having me join.
Yeah, thanks, Ali.
Just a reminder, we'll be dropping new episodes every 2 weeks. If you enjoyed the discussion today, we would appreciate it if you hit the like button and leave us a review or comment below. And to listen to past episodes or be notified when future episodes are released, visit our website at www.discussingstupid.com and sign up for our email updates. Not only will we share when each new episode drops, but also we'll be including a ton of good content to help you in discussing stupid in your own organization. Of course, you can also follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SoundCloud, or really any of the other favorite podcast platforms you might use. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time.